So in today's session, we'll be discussing about outlier detection, which is a very important concept and which is part of clustering concept. Okay. So the image here is very clearly depicting with a red colored symbol here and indicating what is an outlier. So from this picture, we can easily say that whenever any point is not belonging to particular cluster or which is deviating from the actual path of the data points, it is considered as a cluster, or it is it's called considered as an outlier, right? So an outlier is a point which is deviating from the actual data points. Okay. So I hope this picture is clear to everybody, and you can easily understand what is an outlier, right? So moving ahead, I hope this image will give you a more clear indication of what actually is an outlier. So as you can see here, there are a group of fishes which are indicated in different colors. Like one you can see, one is sky blue, one is navy blue, and the only one you can see here is in red color. So the red color one is moving in different path, that is, it is moving from left to right, and all other group of fishes are moving from right to left. So this picture is saying that one fish is moving in opposite direction and it is considered as outlier. So an outlier is an object that deviates significantly from the rest of objects, right? So I hope this pictures gives you a clear understanding of what actually is an outlier. So they can be caused by measurement or execution errors. So while executing some data points, so while applying some clustering methods or anything, so you can easily identify what are outliers, because they will be moving in opposite direction, or which may lead to some execution errors. Okay. So the analysis of outlier data is referred to as outlier analysis, or we can also call it as outlier mining. So outlier concept is very important, because in real time when you're working with some data parameters or real time data, you may encounter many unnecessary data values. They are called as outliers, but not every time outliers are not useful. Sometimes even outliers are useful, but if you want to make them as a useful one, you need to apply many methods, which we can see in the today's session. Okay. Yeah. So to identify outliers, or to discuss about outliers, we have a method or an approach called as clustering based outlier detection, using distance to the closest cluster. So as you have seen in the previous algorithms, when we discussed about k-means algorithm, or in k-medoids algorithm, so you have computed many distance parameters, and whichever point is very away from the neighbors, that is considered as outlier. So because after calculation of distance, whichever the data point or object is having much distance when compared with its neighbors, it can be treated as outliers. So by using clustering, you can identify outliers by using distance functions. Okay. So in order to identify the outlier, firstly we need to initialize the threshold value. That means if you're calculating distance between some data points, so whichever the point which is having more distance, we are calling it as outliers. But what is the threshold value which we need to take into consideration to say it is an outlier? So you always need to keep in your mind that we need to have some threshold value. Okay. So yeah, of then any distance of any point greater than it forms nearest cluster identifies it as an outlier for our purpose. So according to our purpose, we may say it is belonging to outlier or not according to the threshold value. Okay. So the new data point is called as test data. So if the distance between the test data and the closest cluster to its greater than threshold value, then we classify that data as an outlier, which means I'll be showing you that with an example and also a sample algorithm in the next slides. Okay. So this is the algorithm which we need to understand to identify outliers. So yeah, so if you want to detect outliers using clustering method, so this is the algorithm which we will be following. So here we are having 5 steps. The step 1, calculate the mean of each cluster. So whenever, suppose assume that you are having three clusters. So if you're having three clusters and if you are having some data points which you need to identify them into either of the group or either of the cluster, first you need to calculate the mean of each cluster. Then in the step 2, initialize the threshold value, which is a random value chosen by the user or the developer. Next, in the step 3, calculate the distance of the test data or the new sample data from each cluster's mean. So in the step 1, we have identified some mean. Now in the step 3, you need to calculate distance of the test data from each cluster. Whichever the point which is nearer to the test point, that will be considered as the data point belonging to either cluster 1 or cluster 2 or cluster 3. In the step 5, you can see if the distance value obtained between the data points and the mean of the cluster is greater than the threshold value, then it is considered as outlier. The last point of the step 5 is very, very important, because here only you are going to differentiate what is a point belonging to a cluster and what is a point which is not belonging to a cluster. So if the distance value is greater than the initialized threshold value, then it is considered as an outlier. Next, we'll be trying to look into a small example with some data points, like what is a outlier. Okay, so according to the algorithm, we are going to identify three clusters with and calculate its mean. So we can see here, I'm having three clusters, and the cluster one's mean is 20, cluster 2 mean is 30, cluster 3 mean is 35. So initially we have computed the cluster mean by using the mean formulae, and we have obtained three different means. In the step 2, we need to take the random threshold value. So I am saying that the random threshold value is equal to 40. Next, in step 3, we need to calculate the distance of data points to the cluster's mean. But here we have not taken any data points. We are saying that the assumed distance value obtained is 45. So assume that we are going to get a distance value is equal to 45 after applying the distance formula. And according to step 4, we need to identify the nearest cluster according to the obtained distance value. So from this obtained distance value, which is 45, we can say that 45 value is nearer to cluster 3. That is a step 4. And step 5, we need to compare the distance value with the threshold value. That is, 45 is compared with 40, and because 45 is greater than the threshold value, that is 40, it is considered as outlier. So in the real scenario, the same algorithm will be implemented whenever you are having some data points, and thus using this algorithm, we can say easily what is an outlier and what is not outlier. Okay, so in examinations, whenever they ask you to explain the concept of outliers with a simple example, you can use this algorithm, and also you can say, you can take this example and very clearly indicate what is an outlier and how can we detect outliers. Okay, yeah. Now we are having some outlier detection methods for unsupervised data. For supervised and semi-supervised data, so that is a different approach, and we will be having a discussion of unsupervised outlier detection methods. So in unsupervised, which is also called as non-supervised, you are having two different data sets, and for two different data sets, we are having different outlier detection methods. Okay, so for simple methods, you are having three types, like parametric, non-parametric, and semi-parametric. And for complex data types, you are having six different types of divisions according to the data what we are going to take. For example, if we are having high dimensional data set, so high dimensional data set is something like geographical data or satellite images data. These all belong to high dimensional data set, where we have lot of data points which are not useful. And next, sequential data, where we use tree based clustering approaches. And spatio-temporal data for spatial data set, and for mixed type of attributes, for live streaming data set, These all data set belong to complex data set, and for this complex data set we are having different outlier detection methods. Okay, so initially talking about parametric method. So in parametric method we are having three different types of identifications or detections, like based on depth based clustering methods and graph based clustering methods, and also distribution based clustering methods. These all belong to parametric methods. So these all concepts will be applicable whenever you are going to use different types of data set, when you are implementing them in your projects, or you are going to apply them for various analysis. Okay, so if you are interested in learning data science with respect to statistical analysis, then these concepts need to be thoroughly understood, and people who are interested to work with data science in future, these concepts will be very useful for you. So you all need to understand how to detect the outliers. So these concepts can be applied in real world applications also. And coming to non-parametric methods, so in non-parametric methods you are having distance based clustering methods, and cluster based outlier detection methods, and density based. So as we have seen in the previous discussions about different types of outliers, so according to the density of data you're going to apply db scan algorithm, and if you are having some distribution models, so you're going to identify distribution model outlier detection methods. And talking about semi parametric methods, and semi parametric methods you are having neural network based methods, which comes under deep learning concepts. And also you're going to have support vector machine based outlier detections, where we use an hyperplane. So likewise, for each type of data set you're going to take, you're having different outlier detection methods. Okay, yeah, yeah. So here you can see the different ways of detecting the outliers in the real-time application. For example, if you are going to work with Excel and some basic data analysis parameters, you can use line graphs, which can be easily understood for some simple types of data set. For example, if you're having some values on x-axis, x and y values, and simply if you're using a line graph, the points which are moving away from the scale or the line, they are considered as outliers. As you can see in the image, there are some data points which are following some trend, and there is only one point which is moving away from the data points. It is considered as outliers. Likewise, you can use a line graph, and you can use box plot also to identify outliers. So box plot is a very important method where when you can identify outliers easily. Okay, so to understand the terminology called as box plot, so box plot is a rectangular shaped element which has some separation, like you can see here, it is a rectangular box which is having a center called as median, and the points where you can find out the mean. And you can see there is something called as percentile in box plot. So percentile is like a percentage or separation of data points. So here you can see the lower part is called as 0th percentile, and here this is called as 25th percentile, and the median is called as 50th percentile, and here this top rectangular body is called as 75th percentile. And finally in the top you can see here it is called as 100% percentile, but they are not indicated here. So we call basically as 25th percentile or 75th percentile. The 50th percentile is called as mean. Okay, and you can see something like the top you are having something like a t-shaped element called as whisker, and this is called as a box plot. Box plot majorly is useful to detect outliers only. And here you can see any point which is moving above this particular point is called as outlier. On any point which is below this t-shaped element is also considered as outlier. So outliers are any inappropriate values which are not useful in our data analysis. Okay, So any point which is above the box plot or above below the whisker, these are considered as outliers. Okay, yeah. So talking about the in-depth concepts of outliers, there are two types of outliers, like univariate and multivariate outliers. So univariate, you can see like if you are having some single feature space values, it is considered as univariate outlier. And if you are having n dimensional data points, it is considered as multivariate outliers. Okay, so looking at the different data distributions or different data points in a sample space, yeah. So it can be very difficult for us if you are having many data points for a human brain to identify outliers. So for which we need to develop or train a model to identify outliers for us. Okay, yeah. You can see outliers can also be in different flavors depending on the environment you're going to use. Like you can see you're having point outliers and also you're having contextual outliers. So in examinations, if a question is asked about explain about different types of outliers, you need to explain about univariate and multivariate analysis, and also this point outliers and contextual outliers, because point outliers are nothing but whenever you are having some univariate elements or single data points, it is called as point outliers. And whenever you are going to have many data points, like in real-time applications, contextual outliers can be noise in the data, such as unnecessary symbols like punctuation symbols, comma symbols, or any unnecessary symbols in the data. They are considered as contextual outliers. Okay, so these symbols when realizing text analysis or background noise signal when we do speech recognition. So you can see in real-time applications like artificial intelligence and all deep learning methods where you can use uh, any complex data types. So at that time, whenever you will be identifying these outliers as some noise in the data. Okay. So most common causes of outliers on a data set. So this slide is very important for us because whenever you are going to apply the concept of clustering or classification on any particular data set, you may encounter any many errors whenever your data is inappropriate. So here in this slide, you can easily understand what are the most common errors or problems through which outliers can be identified. So the first main reason for which we are getting outliers is human errors, that is data entry errors. So at the lower level where system operators are trying to uh, work with the data designing or data gathering, there may be some errors which can be happened and that need to be understood. And next one is instrument errors, where data is gathered using sensors or any devices. If your devices are not working well, it may lead to some measurement errors. Okay. And next one is experimental errors. So if you are doing some real-time surveys or real-time analysis of data, so you will be doing a number of experiments, and if your data is not properly gathered, it may lead to some data error problems. Okay. And next one, you can see intentional errors. So sometimes people try to apply real-time applications, like we can for doing my analysis, we'll be trying to put some dummy values in my data. They may be called as dummy outliers. So these values will be easily identified by the user because these values are wantedly inserted to identify or to test my model. Okay, these are called as intentional outliers. And next, using next outlier is data processing errors. So whenever you are going to learn data science and you're going to apply your model with some clustering model, so there will be some errors like data manipulation errors. So these errors will lead to some unnecessary outcomes, through which you can use some data analysis tool like R or SAS method. So there are some data manipulation tools wherein you can identify these common errors caused by outliers. Okay. And next one is sampling errors. Sampling errors are very easy to understand, and these are identified based on the whenever the data is given as wrong for us. Okay. And next one is natural errors, which are novelties in the data, which are new points in the data, and which is not an error but which is not useful for our analysis. They are called as novelty errors. Okay. And now let's try to understand why actually we need to detect outliers. What happens if you are not detecting outliers? Okay. So detecting outliers is of major importance for almost any qualitative discipline. For example, because we are working with some machine learning or real-time application of cybersecurity, or if you're working with some data like stock market data where you have some important observations need to be understood. So at this point of time, if you're not understanding outliers, it may lead to some major problems. So outliers need to be understood properly, and thus they are very useful in real world applications. Okay. So in machine learning and in any quantitative discipline, the quality of data is utmost and very important for prediction of the classification model. So if you are designing a model and if you are importing or if you are giving some new data elements to your model, you need to have an appropriate model to do that. So if you are not able to train your model without outliers, it may lead to some unnecessary consequences. So okay, so this is the reason you need to detect outliers at the first phase, then only that will give you some efficient results. Okay. So the most popular methods for outlier detection are, yeah, so the most popular methods are z-score or extreme value analysis, which is a parametric method. So as we have seen in the previous slide about, yeah, different outlier reduction methods. So here we have seen parametric, non-parametric, and semi-parametric method. Now you are going to learn about different types of outlier detection methods which belong to parametric, non-parametric, and other high dimensional data set. So z-score, which is the most common and very basic analysis method, is the belonging to parametric outlier detection method. And next one is probabilistic and statistical modeling, which is also a parametric method. And linear regression model, which is a most important classification method through which we can use principal component analysis as a model to identify or detect the outliers. And next one is proximity based models, which is a non-parametric method. And also these proximity based methods can be used for real world application like information retrieval system, where you'll be having some unnecessary information being extracted and they can be treated as outliers. And you'll be having the last method like high dimensional outlier detection methods, which will be used in when it will be used in complex data analysis like high dimensional sparse data, and for spatial data also we can use this type of outlier detection method. Okay. And now, after detecting the outliers, what should we do? We need to try to treat the outliers and make it as a useful data. Or if that data point is really not useful at any point, we can remove those points in our data space. That is, we can discard the outliers also. So here you can see 5 different types of outlier treatment methods. The first one is retention, next exclusion, imputation, capping, and prediction. So whenever a short answer question is asked in examination, like what are the different outlier treatment methods, you need to mention these 5 types. Now let's see one by one what actually are these outlier treatment methods. First one is retention, which is a very common scenario. So even when a normal distribution model is appropriate to the data being analyzed, outliers are expected for large sample sizes. So this is very important point. So whenever you are having large data points or large data set, so there will be many outliers, and it should not automatically be discarded, because it is having a large data point, that value can be retended, or it can be useful for any further analysis. So whenever you are working with some large sample spaces or large values, you need not discard the values as it is. You need to try to apply any methods like retention, and use that point as a meaningful data analysis. The application should use a classification algorithm that is robust to outliers. For example, uh, we have seen when discussing about classification methods, like SVM is not so robust. So you need to use any method like KNN, which can be useful, or which can be uh, very strong for facing the outliers. Okay. And next one is, the second one is exclusion. So which means wherever there is any appropriate value, or whichever the value is inappropriate for our model, those can be excluded. So detection of outliers is a controversial practice frowned upon by many scientists and sciences. So mathematically, scientists, and they are saying that outliers need to be excluded. But in real time applications, whenever any value which is not very useful, those only can be directly ignored, otherwise they can be used in many aspects. So rejection of outliers is more acceptable in areas of practice where the underlying model of process being measured, and the usual distribution of measurement errors are confidently known. So whenever the values or data points are confidently understood that this value is not so useful, then only you're going to exclude that value. And whichever the values are not useful, you are going to treat them as outliers, and we can exclude them. Okay. Yeah. And the next method is imputation. Imputation method uses mean, median, and mode to identify which value is outlier and which value is not an outlier. And the next method is called as capping. So capping method uses box plot to identify, or to use treat the outliers. So for missing values that lie outside the interquartile range, you can see here 1.5 into IQR. IQR is an abbreviation for interquartile range, where we use this terminology for box plot. Okay. So any value which lie the outside this calculation, that 1.5 into IQR, we could cap it by replacing. So that value is considered as some missing value, and we can replace any value which is the lower limit with the value of 50th percentile or 95th percentile. So this can be understood if you're understanding the box plot well. And the final uh, treatment method is prediction. So prediction value is also, I'm sorry, yeah. So in yet another approach, the outliers can be replaced with missing values like NA, and they can be predicted by considering them as a response variable. So whenever any value can be predicted, so that value will be considered as a useful value, and that can be replaced with a some nearest value. Okay.